Ladies and gentlemen, I'm conducting a scientific experiment. I want to ask y'all if y'all know about Executive Order signed January 19th, 1996 by President Bill Clinton, number 12,986, which designated this as a World Heritage Site under UNESCO, a corporation of the United Nations. None of you heard about this in the mainstream media. None of you heard about it. Nobody's heard about this, have you? Well, they took down the signs in most parks because there was a furor about 3 days after they put up the United Nations signs. No one's heard about it, huh? Well, see, that's how fascism breeds. The environmentalist movement is now nothing but an arm of corrupt international banks and corporations. They're using it as an excuse for land grabs all over the entire world. Remember this, and check it out. Executive Order. Call the Interior Department. Call Bruce Babbitt. Executive Order 12,986. It's important. The modern bureaus of propaganda keep this from you.
No sooner had I turned away that some of the crowd began to laugh and call me a kook. I guess they won't take the time to check out the Executive Order 12,986. I guess they don't believe it unless they hear it from Peter Jennings' mouth.
Most people only look on the surface of things. Most people are not conscious. They never question. As you just saw, I asked the people here if they knew about the Executive Order beginning the long slide towards international control of our wilderness areas and our national parks and monuments. People just don't seem concerned. And that is human nature. But it's not their fault. They haven't been informed. The mainstream media has kept them in the dark. Meanwhile, their rights are being vastly eroded. I'm sure everyone's heard the news. They're planning to close Yellowstone Park to cars. They'll have to come in on buses. That's all part of jacking up the prices. And they're going to restrict cars here in the future. That's all being discussed as we speak. Bruce Babbitt on Meet the Press has said it repeatedly. It's very hard for Americans to make decisions if they're not given good information. And that's the crux of the problem.
President Clinton, with an executive order, an unconstitutional action, has handed over our national parks. Executive Order 12,986. At the Grand Canyon Main Visitor Center, we talked to some of the people at the front desk, and they politely said, yes, we've heard about the UN, but we're not quite sure what's going on. There was some rigmarole, some protest about the UN signs, so they have been moved in some of the national parks. And then later, we got a little visit from the head honchos who were quite rude. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let us take our cameras behind closed doors where I was threatened with arrest. Well, let's go ahead and go to the actual footage for you.
You've heard about the UN biosphere and manned World Heritage Sites and...
Yeah, well, I worked at Mammoth Cave, too, and then one, too.
Yes, they had UN signs there, didn't they?
Right, yeah. Well, they just put those in, though.
They just put the United Nations...
Well, they had one in before, but they're moving them. I don't know, how recently have you been there? 'Cause they were redoing the entranceway, and they're going to put them in a different spot.
We were there about 3 months ago.
Okay, so they probably are pretty much moved, I would think. Because I left, like, 4 months ago.
I have just a question for you. And I know this isn't a policy question. It's just a question about other things. Why do we need the United Nations to put up its signs and to help us oversee our own national parks?
They're not necessarily overseeing our own national parks. Part of what the Biosphere Reserve does, especially in Kentucky, is that it's not for the park, it's for the area outside the park.
Yes, but
so
are you familiar with the executive orders setting up a precedent for world governorship of world parks? And
I've heard bits and tabs, but I haven't read enough about it to say in particular.
But you have seen the UN signs?
Yeah.
But they're not here. See, that's funny, though. This park is under that, but they don't put the signs out. I think if it's such a thing of pride that we're getting into the international community, we ought to put the signs out.
Right. Well, those symbols don't have anything to do with how the park runs. That's just a designation that was just an honorary title, basically.
Oh, it's honorary to go to UN insignia.
Yeah. It's not anything. It helps us maybe get some grants with research and things like that, but that's all it does. It doesn't help control the park in any way.
You mean international money coming in doesn't affect the way the parks would be run?
It's for research and things like that. How does that affect the park?
Well, how it affects it is researchers give recommendations to the parks and to the states locales and the federal government.
Right.
And by doing that, they are paying the researchers. That's the key. That's the keystone. That's the Trojan horse. Then they will give the information that the people. You probably heard the term. If you want a survey, you can pay for whatever you want. You tell them what you want in a survey.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Because I really support the parks. I just feel like that I see too much big. I mean, I don't even mean corporations. I mean super old money banks in Europe and other places are really out for big land grabs, and they're instituting the policies. We're hearing it in the universities. It's almost fascistic measures sometimes. Is there anybody that I can, who will just tell me the same thing you did, but just where I can have a mic on and things?
Well, we have a public affairs officer right here.
Well, you heard me just ask him to just politely talk to a public affairs officer. We were sitting down for about 10 minutes with our cameras off and barely got a shot of her. That's why we had to freeze it. We only got about a half a second of her. She was very rude and drugged me to the back and threatened to arrest me for dare to ask questions. Was I some type of terrorist? And you should have seen the monster they had in the back with us. This is all part of America. Yes, if you ask questions, you must be some type of weirdo. Now, there you have a World Heritage Site sign, one of the 2 UN designations that the Grand Canyon has. And under these, I've already told you many times, the Executive Order 12,986, which turns over control to the international community as collateral on the national debt. I want to make a point. All the rangers and people we talked to up to the point at the office were very kind and polite and helpful. It was only the bigwigs, and they openly told us behind closed doors that they had heard about types like us that were asking questions about the UN. We have to be watched.
It's flat out corruption. You own and control these public lands. Not the federal government and not their international lackey friends controlled by foreign corrupt banks. End of story. Let's get out of here.
Americans have an important decision to make. You're looking at a map of what the United Nations currently controls. They control up to 60% of Alaska and massive areas of the continental United States of America. But the frightening point is what they're planning to take over under the guise of environmentalism. But truthfully what it is a Trojan horse for an international taxation system. And the president has extended them the powers to carry this out. That's why we must get to the Congress and to the people and bring forward this information. That is what they wish to take control of. All areas in red are little to no human use. And all areas in yellow are buffer zones. This is a Trojan horse for an international taxation system. That is the UN's dream ever since the League of Nations failed in 1918. There you have it. Core reserves, little to no human use, yellow, buffer zones, normal use zones of corporation. It goes on. And all the facts and all the documents have been laid out in front of you here today. You're probably asking why you haven't heard about this in the mainstream press. You probably haven't heard about the actual treaties, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You probably also haven't heard about the people that have been standing up against this. People like Congressman Ron Paul, Republican Libertarian from Texas, who introduced H.R. 901 in the 105th Congress to restore sovereignty to our national parklands. There's the choice. We left northern Arizona and traveled back into California on our way to San Francisco to categorize more loss of U.S. sovereignty with Mikhail Gorbachev at the Presidio Naval Base, also part of a UN takeover through the national park system. But before we did that, we dropped by the Los Padres National Park, also taken over by the United Nations. It seems they've taken over every corner of our civilization. The first United Nations UNESCO meeting was held in 1968 in San Francisco at the Presidio Naval Base when it was still a naval base. It was then turned over to the Park Service and subsequently turned over to United Nations control. Mikhail Gorbachev has several foundations there, the Gorbachev Foundation and Green Cross and Green Shield. The people that enjoy themselves on the beach never know and never even suspect the loving, smiley-faced tyranny that is growing in the bosom of their community.